So we're diving into the Gajendra Moksham story today. You shared some really interesting source material on this, and I have to say, reading this translation of this ancient poem, I was just blown away.
It really is a remarkable piece of literature.
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack here.
Absolutely. And you're right, the poetry itself is where so much of the meaning lies.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not know this story, we're looking at a story from the Bhagavatam. That's a major Hindu text. And it's about this elephant king, Gajendra. And he gets caught in this epic life or death struggle with a crocodile.
And you pointed out it's not just, an adventure story, it's an allegory. And to really understand it, we have to look at all these layers of meaning. They're all woven into these verses.
Exactly. The beginning of this poem really struck me. Gajendra is this mighty king. He's totally arrogant at first, and he's living this life of luxury with his herd. But then suddenly he's dragged into this brutal fight for survival. Yeah. And it lasts for 1,000 years. 1,000 years.
And that's not an accident, right? That's meant to, that time scale, it's meant to show us just the vastness of time. It's showing us this endless cycle of suffering. That's something we, as humans, we can really experience that.
Yeah, and it's only after centuries of struggling, when he's tried absolutely everything he can think of, that Gajendra finally gives up. And he cries out to a higher power.
Yeah, there's a big shift in his understanding at this point. It goes from him relying on his own strength and power to actually recognizing his limitations. Yeah. And that's when his prayer starts. And that's where I think the poetry gets really, really interesting.
Oh, you're telling me. There's this one line where Gajendra says, "By whom this world is created, by whom it is maintained, in whom it will be dissolved. To that Lord I pray for my rescue." I mean, talk about a powerful cry for help.
It is. It's so powerful. And, the language here is chosen very carefully. The poem uses a certain number of adjectives to describe God in this verse, 11 to be exact. And each one, it's emphasizing a particular aspect of God's divine nature.
Oh, that's interesting. I noticed all this descriptive language about God, but I didn't even pick up on, the significance of the number of adjectives being used.
It's subtle. It's definitely there. And later on, there's another verse that uses 21 qualities to describe God. And that highlights this paradoxical nature that he has. He's described as both terrifying and pacifying. He's both the root cause of everything, but he also exists for no reason.
So it's almost like the poem is saying that God is beyond our ability to ever fully comprehend. Even with all these descriptions, we're only getting little glimpses of what his true nature really is.
Exactly. The Gajendra Moksham is really acknowledging the limitations of what we understand as humans when it comes to the divine. And yet, even though it's saying we can't comprehend, the poem still suggests we can connect with God through, devotion, through surrender. We can't fully understand him, but we can still ask for help and guidance.
And that's what Gajendra does, right?
Yeah.
But there's this part of his prayer, and he starts to doubt. He's poured his heart out, but he's still stuck in this struggle. And I don't know, I found that so relatable. Those times when you wonder if anyone's listening.
Oh, absolutely. The poem really captures that feeling, that human experience, feeling lost and alone, even when you're trying to reach out for something bigger than yourself. And Padmaja highlights this too. She points out the raw emotion in Gajendra's words. He actually cries out, "I start getting doubt. If he exists, why is he not coming to save me?" It's such a powerful expression of that inner turmoil.
It does make the eventual rescue even more impactful. You really feel the weight of his desperation. And when Vishnu finally appears, it's this huge moment of relief.
And Padmaja's translation, it really makes that moment come to life. The way she describes Vishnu's arrival, it's breathtaking. He's in his heavenly palace, he's playing dice with Lakshmi, and that's when he hears Gajendra's plea. And without even a word, he just rushes to help. He doesn't even stop the game.
Oh, wow. It's this powerful image, right? This immediate, unconditional compassion. I love that detail about Vishnu not even letting go of Lakshmi's garment as he rushes off. It really emphasizes just how quickly he responds to Gajendra.
Exactly. And then she describes this incredible scene. All these celestial beings, they're watching Vishnu as he descends, and they're praising him. And Garuda, Vishnu's eagle mount, he flies ahead, he's announcing his arrival. It's this whole cosmic celebration.
Oh, okay, wait. Side note. I need to know more about Garuda. Is there a whole other deep dive we can do just on this mythical eagle?
Oh, there are so many stories. And the symbolism around Garuda is amazing. We could definitely do a whole deep dive on that.
Please make a note of that. But for now, back to Gajendra and his rescue. So Vishnu shows up. He slays the crocodile with his chakra, and the elephant is finally free. Happy ending, right?
Well, not quite. Remember, this whole poem, it's about layers of meaning. It doesn't just end with the rescue. It goes on to explain that the crocodile, he was actually a cursed Gandharva. That's a celestial musician. And he's freed from this curse by Vishnu's intervention.
Wow, I totally didn't realize that. So
Yeah.
even the crocodile, the one who we thought was the villain of the story, even he finds redemption.
Exactly. And Padmaja takes it even further. She reveals that Gajendra himself, he was also a cursed being in his past life. He was a king, and despite being devoted to Vishnu, he became arrogant, and he ends up being disrespectful to a sage.
So that's why he was reborn as an elephant, as a lesson in humility.
In a way, yes, but it's also about the cyclical nature of karma and the possibility of liberation. So through all of his suffering, through his surrender, Gajendra is finally able to overcome the karma from his past, and he achieves this union with Vishnu.
It's like the story is saying that even when we make mistakes, even when we stray from the path, there's always a chance to come back. There's always a chance for redemption.
Exactly, and that redemption can come through a few things. Recognizing our limitations, surrendering to something bigger than us, and ultimately seeking real knowledge and understanding.
Which brings us back to the power of these verses, right? Patanjali even mentions this, that listening to this story is supposed to offer protection, from negativity. And it's supposed to help people on the path to liberation. It's almost like the poem itself is like purifying you in a way. The rhythm, the imagery, the way these powerful phrases keep repeating, it creates this really immersive experience.
Yeah, it really does. And that's one of the things that makes the GajendraMoksham so unique, I think. It's not just like describing these philosophical ideas, it's actually enacting them through the power of the verses.
That reminds me of something else that Padmaja talks about. It's that story about Pothana. He's the translator who first brought this story into the Telugu language. And he actually believed that divine intervention helped him finish this poem.
Oh, right. He gets to the point where he has to describe Vishnu arriving, but he can't find the right words. So he takes a break from writing. And when he comes back, the poem is miraculously finished.
And his daughter even confirms that he had been in there writing earlier.
Oh.
It's such a cool story. It really adds to this idea of divine inspiration,
Yeah, for sure. It speaks to the power of these stories. They can really transcend time and culture. And it brings us back to that idea of the poem creating an experience for whoever's listening.
Okay, so we've talked about the story, the symbolism, the philosophy, but I kind of want to bring it back to our listener for a minute. What do you think is the biggest takeaway for someone listening to the Gajendra
Well, I think the poem has this really powerful message about the possibility of grace and liberation, even in those really dark times. We might not be, fighting literal crocodiles, but we all go through challenges, setbacks, times where we just feel overwhelmed. And the GajendraMoksham, it shows us that even in those moments, we can still find peace. We can find strength through surrender, through devotion.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And for me, I think it's the reminder that seeking liberation, it's not passive. Gajendra doesn't just sit around and wait to be rescued, He really tries to understand what's happening. He struggles to understand God. And he ultimately surrenders his ego to something way bigger than himself.
And Padmaja highlights that too. She brings our attention to the way the poem is structured. The way that Gajendra's prayer keeps developing, the questions he asks, the metaphors that he uses, it all points to this really active search for knowledge, for understanding.
It's like she's saying the first step to liberation is that journey you take within yourself.
Yeah.
It's asking those hard questions. It's being open to looking beyond what's right there on the surface.
Exactly. And that actually leads into the thought-provoking question that Padmaja leaves us with. She asks, if we think of the crocodile as something else, something that represents our own attachments, our own clinging to things in this world, what crocodiles are we clinging to in our lives? She asks, what would it take for us to let go and find liberation?
Wow. That's really something to think about. What are those things, those attachments that are holding us back, from experiencing that same feeling of surrender and grace that Gajendra finds?
That's something each listener will have to figure out on their own. But the GajendraMoksham definitely gives us a roadmap. It reminds us that the path to liberation starts with knowing yourself, with knowing your limitations, and ultimately choosing to surrender to something bigger than you.
And remember, that journey to self-discovery, that process of letting go, it's not always going to be easy. But as the GajendraMoksham shows us, it's a journey worth taking.
So as you go about your day, I want you to think about those crocodiles you might be holding on to. What would it take to finally let go and to experience real liberation?
And if you're looking for inspiration, Remember the image of Vishnu, rushing to help Gajendra without even a moment of hesitation. May that same grace and compassion be with you as you go on your own journey.
And on that note, we'll leave you to think about those deeper meanings. Until next time, keep searching, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep